There was a point early on where it was like, oh, I have to do things the right way according to what my elders say is the right way. But like, I also think that it's really important to recognize our agency and our sacred responsibility to like being on the path.
Welcome to Spirit and Liberation, the podcast where we bridge the sacred and the political, where ancestral wisdom meets the front lines of organized movement. Every episode, we bring you into conversation with spiritual practitioners, political organizers, and healers who are weaving ancestral wisdom into the work of liberation. We'll discuss everything from community-based care systems to the often unseen spiritual frameworks that accompany our movements. Whether you're a longtime student or initiate of African and Indigenous spiritual practices, or you're just starting to explore these paths, this space is for you. I'm your host, and my name is Jeanette Charles Marquez, and I'm a historian, organizer, and IFA practitioner who is deeply committed to liberation. Today, we're joined by Belia Mayeno Saavedra, someone whose work moves at the intersection of spirit and somatics. Belia is Chicana, Japanese, and Ashkenazi. She's also a transformative coach and somatic practitioner based on Lishan Ohlone lands, known today as Oakland, California. Her work is rooted in care for BIPOC organizers and movement leaders, supporting them to grow their sense of choice, power, and embodiment in body and spirit. Belia's work is grounded in the practice of generative somatics and transformational coaching. She is also a priestess of Oshun Ibu Anya in the Lukumí tradition, a beadworker and a cultural worker. Her connection to spirit moves through her hands, her heart, and her words. In our conversation, Belia invites us to explore the wisdom of the more than human world, nature, and the invisible forces that surround us. Belia considers these forces as partners and collaborators in our everyday struggles and spiritual practices. In this episode, she offers reflections on how we can tap into our world sense, how we interpret or make meaning of our everyday conditions. Building on the exploration of unseen forces, Belia turns our attention inward, urging us to consider the wisdom housed within our own bodies as sites of power and possibility. What does it mean to feel fully at home in our bodies? And how do we learn to notice, name, and reclaim the power that lives in our breath, our bones, and our bloodlines? Belia's guidance is clear. Liberation must be felt, and sometimes the best teachers of this are the ones we do not recognize.
Thank you so much, Belia, for being with us today. I want to ask you a little bit about just what your journey has been in Lukumí and how you got there.
So I'm mixed race. My mom is Japanese and Ashkenazi Jewish, culturally Jewish, and Jews as an ethno-religion, not as her religion. And then my dad, who's Ibaye, he passed away in 2016, is Chicano, Indigenous, and we've more recently learned Afro-Mexican descent. My grandma took a DNA test. That's how we found out. But I was like, yeah, we've been looking at you for all this time. And we like kind of knew, but it's cool to have the science behind it. So I was raised a mix of different traditions. So on my dad's side, they're Catholic, but they're Mexican Catholic. So it's very informed by Indigenous belief systems. A lot of the practices I don't think would be sanctioned officially by the Catholic Church. And so very intensely spiritual on that side. That's not from a Christianocentric worldview. And a lot of the healing practices that I learned growing up came from that side. And then my mom's mom was a Buddhist minister. Her ceremonial name or her Dharma name was Daishin Mitsu Zen. So I was raised around Zen or Soto Zen Buddhism on my mom's side. And so I grew up around like a lot of different contexts to experience spirituality. And I feel also very lucky that people really encouraged me to feel what I was feeling and like identify with what was working for me. And so I would be like, yeah, I had a conversation with that tree today. And everybody would be like, that's legit. What did the tree say? And so it was really sustaining when I was growing up to experience the world that way and have people around me take it seriously, even though they weren't seeing or experiencing things exactly in the same way. Because I think it was like when they talk about adverse childhood experiences, one of the insulating factors is like whether or not you feel like alone or isolated inside of difficult experiences. And I think a through line in my life story has really been like, I don't ever feel like I felt alone, because even if I wasn't around a lot of people or feeling supported by the adults in my life, I felt like I was accompanied by the non-human world or the more than human world. And so that has acted as a compass. And so when I was like 17 or something, I went to Laney College in Oakland, and I went to a class that was like African American art, spirituality, thought, and culture. So the final project could be literally anything about Black people and all of the diaspora. So very general. And I did my final project on Obi and like throwing Obi and how you divine with Obi. And I felt like I was like, oh, this feels right. And I don't know why, because I don't know any people who do this. And then I just started like going to botanicas, and like they would invite me to ceremonies. And I feel a lot of affection and respect for, like a 17-year-old who was like, I trust this, even though I was doing stuff that now is like, oh, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to go like make a bow just because you decided that that's what Oshun wanted you to do. But then when I went to the ceremonies, people would be incarnated with Oshun, and they would acknowledge the offering that I had like come up with in my little teenager brain. And so I met my godparents that way, maybe when I was like 20 or something. So now it's been 24 years, with coming up on 17 years of Ocha.
That's such a beautiful story, such a cool journey. I'm curious, how have you seen your practice evolve over time in these several decades?
I remember that there was like a moment where I was sitting, and, we have our shrines in our homes, and I was sitting on the couch, and I kind of like looked over at my shrine and all my ochas, and like I was like, oh my God, like these are mine. And not in the sense that I am an owner of them, because we cannot own them. We're caretakers and stewards of these shrines in our homes. And there was just like a moment of like, I am responsible to this process and this relationship. And even though I have godparents, and I will always like need to be learning from them how to be a good steward, I'm the one who has to be in that practice of stewardship and relationship. They can kind of tell me the process, but I have to do the process. And that felt like very exciting, but also very, like, I don't know if it's scary, but just like, when you like look up at the stars sometimes when there's not a lot of light pollution, you're like, fuck. And it's just like the grandness and the vastness. I felt a little of that, and small in a good way. And so I think that there was a point early on, and, I think this is an important part of the process, where it was like, oh, I have to do things the right way according to what my elders say is the right way. And I do think it's very important to learn protocol, but like I also think that it's really important to recognize our agency and our sacred responsibility to like being on the path of the process of being good stewards and being in right relationship. That's ours. And it, no matter what, who or what, or, the million titles our elders could have or don't, or whatever relationship we end up having with them, like there's something that landed about like, this is mine and it's not mediated through any other person. And I feel like that was very important. And I think a good time for that to click through at like, 4 or 5 or whatever time that was. I also think another thing that's changed over time, and that also was so exciting about being a part of this project with Spirit and Liberation, is the worthiness, the specialness, the sacredness, whatever you want to say, of like building relationships across iles and traditions. And no shade to some of the elders that I've experienced or learned from, where they're very like a little insular and a little bit like, we're going to be in our cluster and do things the way that our cluster does things. There's lots of reasons for why that might be the case, but like it means that I was like kind of in a lot of ways like trained inside a very specific cluster. And what that meant, which is like question of my perception, is that I overconflated the way that things were done inside the cluster with this is what this tradition is. Those are not the same things. there's a Venn diagram, they overlap, but they're not the same. And so I feel like one of the things that has been really cool is like, as I get more training, as I gain a little more wisdom, I hope, that I also have gotten a lot more trust and autonomy from elders to like go out and spend time in other iles or with other traditions. And there's so much that is illuminating about like seeing how things show up in different, like sort of the same light, but with different prism refractions and different traditions is really lovely. And then it's also been very healing for to speak honestly, like the wounds of whatever happened inside that cluster or continues to happen sometimes, or that I've been witness to like be like, hey, this is not all that there is. And there's so much love and importance about having that root system, but also being able to be like, this is not the entire story. And I get to go out into the world. And Oshun actually like gives me a little push out into the world because I like to be at home. To be out into the world to like discover all the possibilities. Not even all, mentiras. To encounter some of the possibilities that one human body and one human lifetime can experience.
I have a question for you about how you see us activating some of these practices and traditions in relationship to our movement work, which obviously is such an important pillar to spirit and liberation.
Some of the things that I've seen in the past couple years in particular, like ways that these traditions have like connected with like movement work, especially since 2020, is the healing technologies being sometimes the compass that a group uses, although that feels a little more rare. There is certainly instances of that. But then also like after people have an action or after they have a like really hurtful interaction with an entity that holds a lot of structural power or is like straight up violent. So like making like baños with like the sacred herbs and like giving them out to folks for everybody in this collective or something to have access to be able to like at least a little bit be clear that like we don't have to carry like the heaviness and the layer and the pointy pieces of like every experience of violence that we've ever had. And not that those things don't integrate into our experience and not that they don't tremendously shape us and not that trauma is not a real ass thing, but like there is also ways of like the layers that we can peel off more immediate. It's great to get into that practice of doing that because it helps us be more resourced. And then also it's cool to do that collectively where like, hey, me and all these people were all making a deliberate decision to be able to be like, we're not going to carry everything that they wanted to put on us. So more and more I'm seeing folks who are in these traditions who know that kind of medicine. And I have done it sometimes as well, where it's like, oh, we can offer this as a resource to you folks who are, frontline folks. That feels really important. Also, speaking as a person who's, spent a lot of time in the classroom and sometimes those classrooms being in jails. And then also as a person who's done RJ and TJ work, that one of the most harmful dynamics on a larger scale, in the like carceral system or carceral worldview is like, here's the people who are not worthy of life. Here's the ones that we throw away. And that happens in the classroom, that happens in the prison industrial complex, that happens like on all these different scales, that happens in fucking meetings where we're not politically aligned with each other. And so there's like a way that like our bodies have kind of had a lot of practice, like assessing or like figuring out, well, who doesn't get to be here? Like who's not allowed, who's not worthy, who's, I don't know, not politically developed enough or who's problematic or won't. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be accountability, but like that way of doing things is certainly not in the current of the way that things usually move in the more than human world. And so I think this system of spiritual technology also is about like, well, how do you be with in a good way and sometimes learn from those energies or those people or those entities that they do create an impact that feels negative sometimes, or they are, like they say about Elegua and Eshu, like Elegua teaches backwards. And it is hard sometimes to like be knocked on your ass by Eshu. It's hard. And like the mothers of the night, they're there. We don't get to be like, ugh, you know what I mean? Like that system of like being with everything in this ecosystem is here. And it's not really worth it to spend a bunch of time being like, who's worthy to be here or not. Like they're all here. So how do we use our learnings and our medicines to be like, given that everything is here, how do we move in that in a good way? And I think the more that we can apply that inside of like movement bodies and organizing, like we will create more impact and build more power. I'm not the expert to be speaking on this. There's other people in this cohort who are better, but like a little bit of like the failure of what's happening sometimes in left spaces that I've been in is like we waste a lot of energy replicating systems of like punishment and isolation that like could be better served trying to build power even across some degree of difference.
Yeah, I like this connection that you're making too right now. That is a real good signal to the relationship between our different traditions and what they can offer to leftist and or social justice movement spaces, and also the ways in which our systems have practices embedded in them that are very similar to the work that you do around RJ and TJ. And so I'm curious if there are lessons or moments that you want to speak into that can kind of offer us ideas and possibilities about how, when we center this in our work, what is possible.
Well, first, I always want to lead with like a disclaimer of like, I'm not saying I do this right all the time. I'm not saying I do this consistently all the time. Like, I've also arisen from the same type of systems and like ways of being shaped.
Fair.
So just, anybody who's listening out there who I dated in 2002, so basically there's a couple things. One, the questions that I think these traditions encourage us to ask ourselves are often questions that really help us to be in good relationship with the land more than human world and each other as persons, people. So I feel like it can contribute, like, I don't almost like framing questions in a way and moving away, let's say, from like and people don't always say this out loud, but lots of times the framing question is like, are you right and correct enough to be considered safe to like be included here? I feel like these traditions are much more like, what are you? And like, how do we be together? And how do we be in balance a lot of times, like in a way of being in relationship where the destructive energies are not overpowering the generative energies. And so I think that that's usually in that question set, I didn't use the word correct or right or safety because those are not like the central concepts that everything feels like organized around, even though there's like rigor around like doing things according to what it means to have good character, which I think is a distinction. So one, I think it's like question sets and like sort of what is the basis of the conversation and the things that we're asking ourselves about how do we be together is very similar to what's happening inside of the question sets of transformative justice a lot of times. Not who is good enough to be able to be a person. That's not a good question inside of transformative justice. It's like, who was harmed here? Like, what happened? And what is it going to take to create repair? Those ones seem much more resonant with like, so who's here? What are you? What am I? And then like how to get into a balance where it's not just like full destructive energies are dominating. So I think that's one. And then I think that ceremonial and ritual practices of like protocol where we take ourselves through a process of like, this is what's going to happen. This is the opening. This is then this, and this is where this happens. Like the rhythm of being like, we all sort of know what the steps are to go to this process. Ceremonially, that also feels like there's a lot of resonance there. If you apply some of those same like sense of expectation and rhythm and like open building of energy, clothes. A lot of times that's like wonderful principles to be able to apply to conflict conversations or repair of harm conversations. And it's really good for the nervous system too. And the body's like kind of urge to contract relaxes a little when it's like, all right, even though there's a lot stirred up here, I kind of know what's going to happen next. And there's other people here who care about me, who can like hold me and be in the container as we move through what happens next and the parts that we don't know and that are a little mystifying.
One of the things that you keep coming back to, and that maybe we can explore a little bit more too, is the ways in which our traditions open us up to energies and more than human entities that are also influencing our day-to-day realities and also impacting our movements, right? So whether it's like the energy that folks show up to the space with, or the energy that folks bring because of a situation or coming from a march and a mobilization, and that having its own vibration, and then having to run into maybe a strategy meeting, and where in that, running from point A, B to C, because the movement doesn't stop, right? Our struggles don't stop, but like, where are we also making time to tap in and to have touch points, intentional touch points with like spirit and like with kind of like reintegration for ourselves, and also like decompression, right? Like that's kind of also what I'm hearing as I'm listening to you kind of think through how we center more of this work.
Yeah. Thank you for like highlighting that thread. And like to me, that is like ashe, ache, or livingness, right? It's just like something that is alive, including dead things are also alive in their own dead way, or dead entities, ancestors. And that they are, we are, you are, I are, like inherently like get to have like dignity and worthiness because they're here. Like it doesn't have to be like a contended question about like, does so-and-so get to have dignity or worthiness? And that's one of the things that I super appreciate about a lot of what I've learned in these traditions and from my elders. Like one of my teachers was like, don't go pick herbs at night. And a lot of times we'll just get an instruction that says, don't do that. And like, I gotta say, maybe it's like my Western educational training, but I want to be like, but why? Like, why don't go pick away at night according to this lineage? And like, sometimes you ask people and they're like, because something bad will happen to you or like a curse. I'm like, I mean, that's fair. If like it's back in the day, you go pick away at night and there's like a carnivorous feline kicking it, like, okay, that makes sense. But then when I ended up asking that elder later, like, but why for you? And she was like, because you have to give the herbs some time to rest. Like, we can't just take from them 24/7. Like, we have to, if we rest at night, we have to give them the honor and the respect of resting at night too. And, God willing, they'll be there tomorrow. And we can ask permission and do things in a good way then. And so I feel like as I'm thinking about, what I said a second ago, where it's like, yeah, the herbs have dignity. The herbs have worth, and the herbs obviously have medicine to them. And so what would it mean if we were actually able to like hold the principle of like inherent worth and dignity in like all life and all the things that we're in relationship and ecosystem in, whether or not we like all of them or like find all of them to be like correct or acceptable or whatever.
No, I love this. It expands the vision of like what our liberation work can mean. Like what is, when we say as folks in the movement or on the left that we're fighting for liberation, oftentimes it can feel very much like focused on the human experience. And I say this also acknowledging that we have a very important and timely struggle to also protect our planet, right? And folks know this who are involved in climate justice and trying to do as much as possible to prevent future climate catastrophe. And our African and Indigenous traditions and systems inherently protect and defend all creatures in this experience and beyond, right? Like talking about stars and solar systems and other dimensions, right? So I really appreciate kind of you naming the dignity that is also in these non-human, beyond human, more than human entities as well. And maybe there's other values too that go beyond dignity, right? That we don't have language for and stuff.
Not in English anyways.
What's the invitation here for folks who are doing the work and want to connect with spirit, or maybe don't know that they want to connect with spirit, but that are having very spiritual experiences? I think we are driven by a lot of different emotions and a lot of different spiritual factors, whether we understand our ancestral inheritance of struggle, or we are motivated by love and rage and indignation. Those are emotional and they are spiritual and they're physical and they're metaphysical. And I'm just thinking about the folks who may listen to this who are either spiritual practitioners looking to deepen their political practice, or really committed political organizers looking to explore and expand their spiritual practice, So yeah, I'm curious what you think might be an invitation here for folks.
I have a friend. He's like a super seasoned organizer. And we went to the river the other day because I had put something language about the river and Oshun, like in the somatic commitment that I was working on. And so I was like, I got to go be around the river. Like, I'm not just going to fetishize the stereotypical river. I got to go spend some time about the river to feel for what this actually might mean in my body. And we were just chilling and eating sandwiches. And he was like, what does freedom even mean to you? And he was like, sorry, that's a lot. In the moment, looking at all of this beauty and the way that water is moving, I was like, I don't know. I don't know what the right way to narrate this is. But I was like, I think it means that we get to, all the things in our life get to experience their full expression of their aliveness and relationship without trying to power hoard or make any other being suffer for the sake of suffering. So once somebody's expression of their perceived aliveness or safety verges into power hoarding and making somebody else suffer, yeah, okay, we have to find a limit there. But there was something that felt actually livingness and the bit that we get in the grand scheme of things. So much of movement is about our ability to do that. And I think it's Ruthie Wilson Gilmore talks about one of the expressions of racism. I might be totally butchering this, sorry. But racism being sort of producing who gets targeted for premature death. And so that movement is about hey, we don't want to be targeted for premature death, literal or figurative. And then also the spiritual world being we don't want the forces of destruction and unbalanced IQ to just run wild. Both of fundamentally they're seeds of fight for, but also reverence for what it means to be alive. And so I think the invitation is how do we deepen into feeling for the aliveness inside of ourselves and in others, including the more than human world, through ceremony, through talking, through genuinely fucking listening, through just chilling and sitting quietly. How do we be with those things? And that then in that, there's another move forward deeper on this path. The more I get to spend with liveness and a livingness, the more it doesn't even feel like an instruction. It just feels oh, it makes more sense to go that direction. This direction I feel in my body, this feels like the integrous way, or this way feels aligned with my destiny, to use a word that's actually probably more appropriate in our spiritual context.
I feel even the piece, the aliveness that you're talking about and how you understand and define freedom. I'm thinking of how the aliveness of being at the river and having that conversation too, and how that also imbues the whole understanding of what it means, right? Being there, being in the moment, also having the river speak to you, having Oshun speak to you in that way, and also having her present in some way for that conversation also feels very poignant. I'm curious for you from this conversation, what you want folks to leave with.
So I don't know, but I will say one piece that I did want to bring into this conversation that was a part of the conversations that we had together in Brazil. Baba, that I have learned from and received divination from, not as an official teacher, but he's just very generous in his teaching. Baba Chris Abani, who's also a very accomplished author, just incredible as a teacher and writer and person who puts words to things spiritually and in the secular world, though I don't know if there's always a difference between those two for him and many of us. One of the things that he was talking about one time was about the things that are true underneath the ground. And he told me the word in his ancestral language, which is Ibo. And I don't remember how to say the phrase, but I remember being so struck by this concept of the things that are true underneath the ground. And I might be butchering it, but what I took away from it is really this piece around the way that life would move, no matter what humans build on top of it. And that could be on a universal scale, like planet level. And like, I think he talked a lot about like that life just wants to keep expanding. And we could see that in planets and the Big Bang. And we can also see that like in moss and ants and all these different things, right? But I love this idea of like the way that life would move, no matter what humans put on top of it, feels like it helps me have a little perspective about not over-identifying with what we've built on top of it, but how to actually make it the center of like, well, how can we be with each other? And so that also has helped me have like I don't know, a metric, or I don't know how I want to use this word, but basically it's like a way for me to assess like what makes sense for me and how I want to practice my aliveness or being alive. So for instance, there's huge conversations to be had in our traditions, lots of different perspectives about the role of queer and trans people. And that is like a place of major contradiction. It's a place of major wounding. It's a place of like very specific rule sets for some. Like there's lots there. And so I think that if I was kind of like, okay, well, like what is the right answer on this? And try to figure out like which person told me the right answer on this. I haven't really gotten anywhere on that question. But like when I'm like, okay, well, we've got people and we've got the things that people say and the things that people build. But then also, we also have a more than human world that is full of beings that would be called, if we put our language on it, trans. Or entities or beings that are like tons of animals. There's like a whole thing about lesbian seagulls that I'm really obsessed with. Google the lesbian seagull colony. But there's like just like a whole entire long tail back to like prehistoric times of like animals practicing what we would call as humans, like homosexuality or transness. And so I'm like, all right, so that means that it has a place here because that's what the more than human world and the way that life has been moving all the time. So I feel resolved in how I feel about it. And I also feel less pressure on myself to come to the right way of looking at it. And I also feel less need to try and make somebody else around me see it the way that I do. Like I feel a little bit more able to be with people's perspectives on it. Although the ones that are like really on a certain end of it, I'm like, okay, this is hard to be with. But there's just like an orientation of how I listen there that I feel like changes. And I think that that also goes back to this piece around like need. I don't know if you like look at a duck who's like swimming around in the river that I saw the other day. Like the duck is not like, am I a bad person? Am I a bad duck? Because like I don't have as much like little, I don't know, whatever they were eating, like little pieces of like algae. Like that guy has more and I only have a little and I need more. And then he goes and gets some more, like from the homie who has like more algae where he's swimming. But like, I don't think the duck made up a whole narrative internally about their worth because they had more or less of the thing that they needed to stay alive. So I think that that's like been good in my system to remind myself when I'm like, I have a need. And then I have a ton of shaping that's like needs are embarrassing, needs are bad, needs are shameful. It's like too much to need things. And then I try to like find in my body memory, like all the times that I've seen non-human teachers and human teachers like express a need and have it met or meet somebody else's need and like how congruent that is with the way that life is moving. So I guess the thing that I just want to make sure that I surface is like, how are we attending to and in relationship with the things that are true underneath the ground?
Oh, I love that, Belia. Thank you so much. I feel like that is, I'm going to sit with that message. And I know a lot of people will too. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom shared and all of your beautiful, more than human experiences and interactions.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Greetings, this is Francisca Porchas Coronado, and today I bring you a story from the Holy Odu of Odi Okanran, and this is about the deity Oshun. She is the only female primordial spirit in the solar system, primarily in charge of matchmaking and protecting children and women from abuse. Oshun and Orunmila had been married for a long time. Orunmila was a proficient and well-known Ifa priest, known as Babalao, and he was always being called to do Ifa work and spiritual missions all over the land and the world. While he was away, many people would come to his home, needing support, but did not find him. Oshun would be telling people constantly that he was away and wished them best of luck with their challenges, or that she could contact them when Orunmila returned in order to help them. When Orunmila came home, she told them there was a real challenge in turning people away while he was on Ifa mission and not being able to support them with their life challenges. She proposed to him to teach her to consult for people while he was away to be able to support them spiritually. Orunmila said he would consider it and contemplate how to teach her Ifa consultation, given that Ifa training takes at least 10 years to be proficient enough in order to cast Ifa, many more years to be excellent and well-versed. He thought about it deeply for some time. Then he decided to create a system of divination to teach Oshun fairly quickly in service of the community. The system had to be learned in less time and be less detailed in terms of the information and rituals and medicine, but still very effective in supporting people spiritually. He then designed the Erin de Logun system, the cowrie shell system of consultation. Oshun was the first to learn this system that is now known across the Americas in the Orisha practice diaspora. He felt confident that the consultation done by Oshun would help people tackle the challenges of the community, support them spiritually, and give them the hope they needed in being able to navigate and overcome difficulties, including death, loss, sickness, conflict, but also in gaining longevity, wealth, spouse, children, and victory over adversaries. Oshun then became the first proficient Orisha priest, known as Olorisha. She then taught all the other Orishas, such as Ogun, Shango, Obatala, Oya, among many others. This story is from the library of Oluwo Sholagba de Popola. Ashe.
Thank you again for joining us today on Spirit and Liberation, brought to you by the Latinx Therapist Action Network. And a special thank you to Belia Mayeno Saavedra for her loving lessons in spirit and somatics. If this episode spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone in your circle. Spirit and Liberation is hosted by Francisca Porchas Coronado and Jeanette Charles Marquez. Today's episode was produced and edited by Phil Circus.